Away from that, the agitation for the increase of minimum wage has continued to generate reactions from political pundits despite the suspension of the nationwide strike, and that the tripartite meeting on minimum wage should continue for the next 1 week in order to reach a concrete resolution with the labor unions and organized private sector. Organized labor has now vowed to reject any loan addition to the 60,000 naira offer by the tripartite committee on the new minimum wage. President of the Trade Union Congress, TUC, Festus Osifo, stated on a sister station yesterday that the union will not take anything that is not substantial. Though he refused to mention a specific amount, he did say that the new minimum wage must be equal in purchasing power to the value of 30,000 naira in 2019 and 18,000 naira in 2014. Osifo also faulted the Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice, Lateef Fagbemi, for describing the industrial action by labor as premature and illegal. He argues that during this year's Workers' Day on the 1st of May, organized labor gave government a 1-month notice, which ended on the 31st of May 2024. Lawyer and development consultant Titi Lokwe Anifo-Oshe joins me again on the program this evening for more on this development. Ms. Anifo-Oshe, thank you for joining us again. Organized labor has now vowed to reject any lean addition to the 60,000 naira offer by the tripartite committee on the new minimum wage. You're with the office of the SSA to the President on Citizenship and Leadership, I believe. Are you aware of what the latest figures are as we speak, particularly from the federal government?
Well, I'm speaking as a lawyer and as a citizen of Nigeria right here, right now. I'm not speaking as an agent of the federal government.
Okay, I thought you were going to give us some insider gist, but I'm sure you're aware that the tripartite, before the strike, we were told said they would not add anything more to the 60,000 naira. But in the meeting on Monday, Mr. President did commit to much more than that. Labour, however, on the other side is saying that it won't take a few thousands as addition. Is it clear how far this administration is willing to stretch in order to meet Labour's demand?
My stance is simple. I think reasonability and tenability is what we should work with right now. A few thousand could be 5,000 naira. A few thousand could be 5,000 naira, it could be 6,000 naira. But so far, we must always remember that we're talking about a 100% increase. We have to be very clear with the statistics and the number. A few thousand naira, we're talking about 60,000 naira plus. 60,000 naira plus entails a 100% increase of what staff of the federal civil service and the state civil service across the country are currently enjoying. So whether or not it is 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 naira, the facts are clear. The federal government has been magnanimous, empathetic, compassionate enough to agree to a 100% increase for what we have right now.
In Naira and Kobo, that's not completely accurate. If you add what's it called now? The award, the 35,000 Naira wage award that the federal government was paying as early as February. That shot the figure as high as 65,000 Naira. So, you know, for someone who's been earning 65,000 Naira, you agree with me that that person would not take 60,000 as a 100% increase?
Well, I'm sure you're also aware that what binds the minimum wage is the Minimum Wage Act. And what we have right now is the Minimum Wage Act with regards to the 30,000 naira change a few years ago. So what we're talking about right now, I am speaking to you from the angle of what the law is, what the statutory provision is. The statute, the Minimum Wage Act that is in force right now, has a 30,000 naira increase. The negotiations on the table right now is a 60,000 naira plus, which is equivalent to a 100% increase. Mathematics, but of course, the law is the law.
I understand the law, but you know, the average Nigerian is also concerned about the economic realities since the removal of full subsidy on Mr. President's first day in office. So at 36,000 at 36% rate. You know, you and I know how much commodities are in market today relative to what they were 1 year ago. You don't want to say you agree that 60K is enough pay for the average Nigerian worker, do you?
Well, since you've delved into economics, I mean, we need to be very realistic here. If we are talking about an increase, we also must look at it from the angle of value and productivity. Do you remember 2 years ago that when the IPPS was brought in place, it was able to bring out 70,000 ghost workers? My proposition is simple. If we are talking about an increase, we must also look at it from the angle of productivity and value. And if we just want to do the numbers, we have to be careful, we have to be realistic, because at the end of the day, do you want the government to print out naira notes and then cause an inflation? Or don't also forget that what we're talking about right now is not just for the federal government. If the federal government can pay this money, what about the state government? Let's not forget that we have right now statistics, numbers, facts and figures clear about how only 11 states out of 36, that's equivalent of 66% of states, can pay salaries independently without waiting on federal allocation. What happens to the remaining 25 states that cannot do that? Okay, what about the private sector? Today, companies, SMEs and MSMEs are currently grappling with the inflation to be able to stay in business at the moment. So if we are looking at that, let's not forget that it's minimum wage, not poverty wage, not living wage. Minimum wage should be the barest minimum. So we need to look at how tenable is it for even the private sectors, the employers should be able to, pay their staff. We need to be very critical about that. It's not just about labor and federal government alone. It's about labor, federal government, state government, and even the private sector.
I hear you clearly, Ms. Anifowose. We're going to get to the capacity of state government shortly. But I hear you say minimum wage, not living wage. Actually, what Mr. President promised in the early days of his office to workers was living wage. And if you check his speech, he actually said he's promising Nigerian workers a living wage. But Labour is saying right now that the new minimum wage must be equal in purchasing power to the value of 30,000 naira in 2019 and 18,000 naira in 2014. Does that make economic sense to you?
Now, which is why beyond this salary that we are talking about, the government across board has been able to bring up initiative, both monetary and non-monetary, to be able to ameliorate the suffering, to be able to mitigate the harshness of the current inflation. Is it the 185 billion palliative that was given to states that we want to talk about, or the 200 billion naira to support cultivation of hectares of land, or the 75 billion naira that was injected into the manufacturing sector, or the 1 trillion naira students loan that was given for higher education, or is it the 100 billion that was invested into the procurement of CNG? We need to be able to aggregate all of this. We can't just look at it independently. We have to look at it holistically. What are we doing? Are we negotiating these things for Nigerian people, or are we negotiating for a section of people? Also, we are forgetting an area that nobody is talking about, the local government. At the moment, we're still trying to get the autonomy of the local government. Local government workers are also civil servants. So we need to be realistic about this thing. Of course, minimum wage, yes, living wage and what have you, but the government has been trying their best across board to ensure that it's not just about the salary alone, but for a standard of living that is comfortable for every Nigerian, irrespective of where they work, whether private sector, whether public sector.
It's also important that we don't underestimate the capacity of federal government, because I recall that in the first month after Mr. President announced removal of fuel subsidy, he talked about how government has been able to save 1 trillion naira in a month. So, the conversation out there has also been, it does seem like we have a lot of money. So federal government should be a bit more generous. How do you react to that?
Well, let's remember, federal government gives allocation to states. The facts and the figures are there. Between January to June, just last year, states borrowed 46.17 billion from 3 banks to be able to pay salaries. Even with the 40% boost in the FASC allocations, 24 states still need about 566 billion, whether to borrow or wherever it is they want to get it, to be able to pay salaries. We have to be productive. We can't spend all that we have paying salaries. There's so many aspects of national development that we need to pay attention to. That is why I am so emphatic on reasonability. What about the inflation? We have a 40% inflation, higher than what we've ever had in about 25 years or thereabout. So why should federal government spend all of what they have to pay salaries? There's so many things that we need to focus on beyond salaries. Yes, I understand that civil servants are the fulcrum of any working nation. But of course, nobody is looking at their productivity. How do we manage it? How do we balance the increase in the productivity, the output that we'll be getting, or the input that we'll be getting from this staff? What are they promising the Nigerian people to do better if this money meant for other aspects are now going to be imputed into payment of their salary? Nobody is talking about that. Everyone is just all about what the federal government, what the state government, what the employers in the private sector are going to give. But of course, do not forget that to be a good leader, you have to be a good servant as well. So it's not just about what you stand to get, but what are you giving back to the government? What are you giving back into this to make Nigeria a better place?
Well, the members of the Tripartite Committee now have 7 days. I think is short of 1 or 2 now to be able to make a decision that will appease labor union, because they really did shut down the economy on Monday, and we don't want to see a repeat of that as we count down to the 12th day of June. But that's our time, Ms. Anifowoshe. I think it's an interesting conversation, and we're going to continue it subsequently. Tisilope Anifowoshe is a lawyer and development consultant. Thank you so much for joining us on the program this evening. And she's also talked about local government autonomy, which is what we're talking about next on the program. Stay with us, everyone.